morning, ladies and gentlemen. So as Stephan mentioned, my name is Stephan Gilliland. So I look after the security solutions within Co-Create. And there's two specific solutions that we would like to highlight today. So obviously a lot of you guys have made various of investments in security products, security solutions, and we're not here to rip and replace a lot of that. Most of the stuff that you've already implemented is there for a specific reason and it's doing a job well enough. What we would like to do is more augment what you already have in place, and as well as see how we can integrate those solutions into our offerings that we've got. So the first one that I would like to highlight is Absolute. So Absolute's not a new product, it's been around since the early 90s. And basically it is a cloud-based endpoint security solution. Call it a software as a service that helps you monitor your assets, and it basically helps you monitor, track, give visibility, and give you a complete overview of what you're sitting with. And this is actually something that is quite important, especially for most IT organizations, knowing exactly where your assets are and knowing exactly what's on those assets. There's obviously a lot of asset management and tracking solutions out there. However, what makes this specific one quite unique and different is it's the only persistent solution out there. What I mean by persistence is Absolute actually partnered with 25 of the leading manufacturers where they embed a persistence module in the firmware and the BIOS of the machines itself. These OEM manufacturers, i.e. Lenovo, Fujitsu, HP, Dell, all have a partnership where this gets done at manufacturing level. So next question I would get is, so how does this actually work and what does it do? So from a persistence perspective, there's two sides of this. One being the persistence module itself sits in the firmware itself, so it captures the image that you as an organization creates on the logs or on the system itself, meaning that if somebody tries to flash the system, reload operating system, swap out the hard drive on the machine itself, all of that will be reverted back to the original image that was loaded onto the machine itself. And this is what the persistence agent is there for, to heal and restore the actual Microsoft agent. That's the one side of it. Second side of it is you can actually link specific applications to the software or the persistence module itself, meaning from let's call it an antivirus or a VPN. If something like that needs to be constantly enabled or switched on from an organization's control measures, then this will actually be switched on and held as active. So if an end user switches off the VPN or the antivirus, for instance, that'll automatically be switched on within a second to make sure that it stays enabled at all times. And this is basically what the persistence module makes it quite unique. So there's three specific areas or elements that we focus on when it comes to Absolute. One being asset intelligence, which is the important side for most IT individuals. The continuous compliance, which is very important for organization to stay compliant for various things, hardware or software driven applications. And then obviously from an endpoint security perspective. From a asset intelligence perspective, there's various things as an IT organization that you would like to know and understand about your assets. Mainly who's using the actual asset itself, where the actual asset is located at all times, especially when we implement a work from home or remote working policy. And then also what is on the device itself, what changes have been made on the device, and then obviously how often a device is actually used. And this is something that can be implemented either working from home or actually when you're on site as the update or the agent gets pushed to the actual devices itself and then gets activated. From how often a device is used, you can actually make sure that you allocate the correct resources to the correct people. What I mean by the monitoring is this actually monitors physical activity that happens, keystrokes, mouse movements. Somebody sit at home watching Netflix the whole day, it'll actually only record the 10 seconds it took them to initialize the actual video or movie that's playing, not the 2 hours of the movie actual playing. It doesn't record screen time, it actually records physical activities. So the next one is quite important, and it's probably one of the main topics that we're discussing, is compliance. As an organization, you most probably need to be compliant to some form of standard within the organization or from a global standard, i.e. one of the ISO standards, or just from a security compliance perspective, meaning POPI or one of these. And from that, there's quite a bit of information that you need from your assets and from your users. So one being sensitive information. So there's a lot of sensitive information sitting on specific assets itself. And as an administrator, you would like to know, does that person actually have the right to have that specific information on the asset itself? Or no, they're not allowed to have it. So what this does is you can schedule a scan to run either daily, weekly on each one of the machines, and it reports back various things. Basically anything like banking information, credit card details, ID numbers, things like that. So you can then, as an IT administrator, make the decision, yes, the person is allowed to have it, they're sitting in HR or finance, or no, this person's sitting in a call center, why are they sitting with this information? And you can then take the necessary actions, or you can just remotely delete the file off the system.
Can you remotely take it off their actual device?
Yes. So from a device protection, we basically monitor the state of the actual asset itself, making sure that the devices are encrypted, the device tracking, again, the actual location of each one of the assets, and also looking at the complete security app health status, making sure that not only that all the devices have a specific application installed on it, but that it's also up to date with the latest version of that specific application. So you can literally drill down to monitoring the version of it. And then lastly, you can do device patching through each one of the devices itself. Then ransomware. So Absolute's not going to help, or it's not going to prevent ransomware from actually attacking, but what it will do is provide you with enough information to make sure that you don't get attacked by ransomware. So you basically have visibility on various elements at all times. Basically checking your strategic ransomware readiness. This is by monitoring let's call it the dashboard at all times, giving you visibility, maybe getting reports on a day-to-day basis. So you've got the complete baseline across all your endpoints in terms of what is on these devices and what it's being used for. It basically expedites recovery tasks. And lastly, it provides you with remote assistance on recovery, basically if a device is lost or stolen, how they can assist you with the recovery of that specific asset itself. And then endpoint security. So this is something that is quite important for most organizations, because obviously with the work from home and people working in various locations, they've got extreme access to extreme sensitive information at all times. So on a day-to-day basis, when the machine is under the control of an organization, there's various checks that happens. Basically making sure that the device is encrypted, it's got antivirus installed on it, all applications are healthy and alerts are configured. Now let's say that specific device is then lost or stolen. The visibility of that specific device actually continues, and it gets reported back to administrators to say that I've lost my device. Then automatically we check various elements on there. Firstly, we try and locate the actual device itself to see where the asset resides. We see if somebody perhaps is trying to replace the operating system on the machine itself. So we check the product key of the OS that was installed against what is currently reflecting on there. We check if the antivirus is up to date and if the hard drive is encrypted. That is specifically important so that somebody can't pull out the hard drive from the machine, pop it into an external bay, and then from there on get access to the information. We also check the serial number of the hard drive to see if somebody, for instance, is trying to replace the hard drive on the machine to get it back up and running. And also the login logs for the machine to see if somebody else is trying to access the machine either remotely or physically logging in. While all of this is going on, we push what we call a device freeze message. This is a customized message that basically looks something similar to this, basically pointing out the device is lost or stolen. This basically prevents the device from being used in any way. So if the person tries to reload the operating system, tries to flash the machine, they will constantly get this message. Swap out the hard drive and try and reload the operating system, they're going to get the same message. There's only two ways to get rid of the image. One, an authorized administrator can remove it, or two, replacing the motherboard of a system. And as most of you would know, that's been a techie at some point in your life. Replacing a motherboard on a system costs more or less the same as what a new notebook costs. And then if there's still quite a bit of sensitive information on the device itself, we can initialize what we call a remote data delete or crypto wipe, removing all information or sensitive information from the machine itself, making sure that there's no trace of sensitive information for somebody to actually access. So from a product offering, there's 3 different offerings. We can almost call it a good, better, best, each one basically adding some features, where with visibility, as it states, it gives you good visibility of your actual fleet itself. Moving over to control, it gives you additional control postures and states that the assets are under. And then lastly, resilience, which basically encompasses everything from visibility and control, as well as then it gives you the ability to actually push patches through to the end devices, as well as then it gives you the ability to recover those specific assets. What I mean by that is if a device is lost or stolen and it's tracked not only in South Africa but globally, Absolute facilitates a team with the guys overseas, and then they actually go out and recover those specific assets and bring it back to South Africa. So from a licensing perspective on this, there's, as you can see, 3 different licenses. You only get billed on active licenses. What I mean by that is if you, for instance, procure, let's call it 700 licenses, you load it on all 700 devices, but then 200 of those devices go into a storeroom. Month 1, you're going to be billed for 700 devices. Month 2, you're only going to be billed for 500 devices that's active. Those devices in the storeroom will still have, let's call it, visibility on them to say that we can see what the last location of these devices were, but they're not active. And then obviously your functionality between each one of these differs, and you can have a mixture of licenses. You can have 100 visibility licenses, 300 control licenses, and 100 of the resilience licenses, depending on how you want to mix it. And you can upgrade and downgrade on a monthly basis depending on what the needs of the organization is required. And then from a, let's call it an overview, most guys are like, okay, well, this is quite interesting, but ideally, how much does this cost? So this can be on a monthly basis billing, or you can pay this annually, depending on the term that you want to pay this for. And pricing varies. Visibility cheapest license will cost you roughly about 19 Rand per device. Control, right up to resilience, which is the most expensive one, will cost you probably about 40, 42 Rand per device. That is per month. No, so you can have 1 device on there, or you can have 100 devices on there. However, the more devices you scale, then that price bracket comes down. So what I quickly want to do is I want to show you a live dashboard of Absolute itself, because it usually makes things a little bit easier for you to actually see what a demo of this would look like, rather than me showing you PowerPoint presentations and, in theory, what things would look like. So as mentioned, it's a cloud-based system or dashboard monitoring tool. As you log in, the first page you would see would be the dashboard itself. And this is a fully customized dashboard. You can basically change this to however you want it to look, whatever is priority for you to see on a day-to-day basis. So first block you'll see there is the encryption status. That basically shows you from a complete fleet what percentage of your devices is encrypted and what is not encrypted. On there you can actually select the red part of it, and it can show you exactly what devices are not encrypted, and then you can do the necessary actions. Dark devices refers to devices that hasn't actually logged in or pushed back any connection to the to a network in the last 30 days. So this can be either due to devices sitting in a storeroom, people going on maternity leave, or just IT administrators that forgot to wipe a machine after somebody left the organization. Then you've got a application health status. This is linking back to, it basically takes everything into consideration. Antivirus, encryption, if you've got specific things on a device that's not supposed to be there, it basically looks at the complete state and it tells you, okay, this is what your complete health status looks like, and then you can obviously do something about it to make sure that it is close to 100% as possible. Then you've got anti-malware on there. So it shows you exactly what is installed on how many devices. You can have your makes and models on there. And then device usage. So this is as per what I mentioned, you can see how many users are heavy users, moderate users, light users, and then how many devices obviously hasn't logged in a specific period of time. And then one last one that I've got on here would be the operating system. So you can see how many users are running what version of OS on there. And what makes this quite nice is we've actually had customers that implemented this and they came back and they realized that they still have users running on Windows XP. Next, you've got an overview of your assets, basically the device name, when they've last connected, so various information around that specific asset itself or various assets. And then from there on, you can literally drill down into each one of those assets to see specific things that you want to monitor around it. Like for instance, it gives you a good overview of the actual asset itself, basically what machine it is, who the machine basically belongs to. You can get some Windows information around it. As per what I mentioned, there's the product key. From there on, you can get some system information. What is the free hard drive space available on the machine, the memory, virtual memory in use, CPU usage, those kind of things. BIOS updates, when last the BIOS update ran, what version of BIOS is on the machine, and then quite importantly, the battery level of the machine itself. This is quite important for us, especially specifically when a device is lost or stolen. So it basically gives you a good amount of time to tell, okay, well, we only have, let's call it, a couple of hours to recover the assets before the battery dies, unless the guy that stole the notebook was clever enough to steal the AC adapter. So from a asset perspective, Absolute tries to make things as easy as possible for you to manage various things. So it's literally as simple as clicking on a button to initiate specific commands. As you can see up top, there you've got your device freeze, which is the message that I displayed earlier. If somebody returns back from, say, maternity leave and the device freeze message needs to be removed, it's as simple as clicking a remove freeze button. The freeze can also be initiated immediately, or it can also be initiated after a specific set period of time. So say for instance you've got somebody leaving the organization at the end of the month, you can say that at 12 o'clock on that specific day it should then initialize the freeze message and it can pop up, so that specific person will be unable to then actually use the device or retrieve any information from the device after that point in time. You can run scripts, so there's a whole script library in here where you can access various things. Even if you just want to write your own scripts and push it to the devices, it uses Microsoft PowerShell to push the scripts through to the devices itself. There's the wipe button to basically crypto delete or wipe the information off the device itself. And then after the period where the device has reached its end of life, you can then unenroll the agent off the device itself, and then from there on the user can then take the device home and use it at their house, and they won't be monitored. So the thing that most organizations want to see is obviously, as per what I mentioned, the live tracking of the actual asset itself. Basically making sure that an asset is exactly where it's supposed to be. From there on, if we would like to actually access that specific asset to see where it actually resides, we can drill down specifically to a specific asset, and if you want to see where the asset resides within a building, you can actually drill down to more or less exactly where the asset would be within that specific organization.
What happens if you take the battery out?
So unfortunately, then obviously you will be unable to track it, but at some point in time they need to switch the device on, which will basically then we'll be able to track it again, and we can then obviously recover, or depending on what the situation is.
Okay, the other question is, you would have to advise your employees or whoever's using the laptop that it is being monitored, because otherwise I think you'd fall foul of
Yes.
some law somewhere.
Yes. So if, basically depending on the company's policies, as well as stating that if this is a company asset, for instance, you have the full right then to monitor the asset because it is your asset, and depending on what your policies are on allowing employees within organization to keep private information on the system or not.
Yeah,
It all
because
depends on those
Because if
policies.
you wipe someone's information,
Yes,
you've got a major problem.
of course, of course.
Okay.
Is this dependent on a specific OS? In other words, does it support other operating systems like Linux?
So it's specifically for designed for Windows. However, you can run Linux on there. It'll do pretty much the same monitoring system or side of things. However, obviously with Linux, it's a bit more limited in terms of what it monitors or reports back on rather than Windows based.
So earlier you mentioned that it's for some of the vendors, it's integrated into the firmware. Does that mean the system actually has to boot into the operating system for it to work, or can it actually just boot as long as, or rather, does it work as long as the power is on?
So the way it works is the image itself gets captured from a BIOS or firmware level. So depending on obviously how you set the machine up from the specific OS perspective, as soon as it boots up and there's a network connection, it'll actually pick up. So as mentioned, the agent is installed at factory level. There's, I would say, probably about 98% of all devices has got it. The reason for the 2% is that it's usually linked towards the devices that's specifically for retail, which is generally not the market they're covering. So the rest of the devices will then be covered under Absolute. So I would say probably if you're using a Lenovo, HP, Dell, one of those devices, there's a 99% chance the firmware is already installed on the device itself. It's just a dormant agent that doesn't do anything. It just sits there. Until the agent gets a license key to be activated, then it only becomes live.
Is it part of the OS, or is it part of the BIOS? In other words, does it have to get into the OS before it can work?
No, so it's part of the BIOS itself, but it does use the OS for the monitoring side of things.
Okay.
But from a BIOS level itself, you can monitor as per what I showed, various things like, for instance, the memory, the hard drive, those kind of elements around it.
Okay.
So even if you flash, for instance, the operating system itself, it won't wipe it until you, it'll actually reload the existing image that you've displayed on the machine.
Thank you.
Hi, excuse me. Does the machine need to be connected to the internet for it to be tracked? That's if it's stolen.
Sorry, repeat that?
Does the computer need to be connected to the internet for it to be tracked?
Yes, because there's a GPS location signal that needs to be transmitted. However, luckily with Windows, you're extremely limited in terms of working on a machine. If you're running Windows 10 or Windows 11, is extreme functionality in terms of limitations that you can run if you're off a network. So you would need a network to connect to it. However, most of the machines manufactured in the last, I would say, 3-4 years has got something called Wake on LAN, meaning that your network connectivity actually connects back to various networks or open networks. So what the system does is as soon as we report it as lost or stolen, that specific agent will suddenly start looking at open networks. So for instance, if somebody is running through, let's call it a shopping center, it'll start searching for open networks to connect to in a shopping center. Like for instance, if you're running past Wimpy and they've got an open network, it'll connect to it and it'll send through specific information back to the central repository for us to locate. So just looking at the user management itself, so you can allocate various users in organization to do various things. In terms of role management. And then obviously according to that, then you can also determine to say that specific users are only allowed to have specific administration rights, so they can either view specific things or they can have full access to do whatever they please with the specific asset. So in this case, let's look at a guest user. This is somebody that can view various things, but from a management perspective, they can see alerts and things like that. But they can't really change a lot on the device itself. So this helps you control the specific rights and accesses that your administrators control when they actually look at these specific assets. And then there's various options on here. I'm not going to go through every single one of these things. The one that I just would like to show you is the script library, so you can just see what it looks like. So as mentioned, there's a whole list of things from the script library that you can push, as well as then you can write your own scripts on here. Any additional questions or anything that's unclear that somebody would like to see? So CompuTrace uses a version of Absolute built into their system itself, but it is CompuTrace is just an organization. It's not a solution.